Welcome everyone to our special interview series that I like to call the Humans Make Games series. We are joined today by Alex Beddows. Alex is the host of the Game Dev Discussion podcast and the senior environment artist at Counterplay Games currently. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Dude, thank you for having me on. I'm pleasure to be here.
No, Alex, I was excited to have you on. I started listening to your podcast. I enjoy anything that talks about the game industry, and just hearing the different perspectives from all the different guests that you've had on your podcast has been super interesting. So, for anyone that is looking for that, can you tell our listeners where they can find that podcast or where they can download it?
Yeah, so if you it's called the Game Dev Discussion Podcast. It's on all the major platforms if you search it in Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes. It's also I'm partnered with a learning community, the Dynasty Learning Community. So there's a YouTube channel, the Dynasty Empire, and there's all sorts of stuff on there. There's my podcast. The guy who runs the community, Jeremy Estrelado, he's now the lead environment artist at Ubisoft Massive. He streams himself learning software, and we have a couple of other guys who are big Blender users who put out a lot of like Blender tutorials. So for environment artists, it's a great place to go for learning resource. The YouTube channel is probably the best place to go just because there's so much stuff there.
Very cool. Well, Alex, thanks for joining us. So looking at your work experience, as I was kind of looking at you and doing some research online, you've worked at a lot of game studios, doing a lot of contractor work. You were with Serious Game Studios, Mountain Wheel Games, the Inspired Gaming Group, Level 5 Gaming, Decagon, working at ArtStation right now doing some teaching on ArtStation. Is that correct? Is that
Kind of. I do some courses. It's mainly so ArtStation last year launched the learning platform where people we reach out to artists to create learning content, and I manage that platform now.
Oh, very cool. And then currently you are working at Counterplay Games, and Counterplay is working on Godfall. And that's not something we're going to touch on a lot here in this podcast because there's a lot of things that they're not ready to say. So instead of me bugging you and saying, no, we can't talk about that, I think it'd be more interesting to talk about things that you are allowed to talk about and really talk about how you got into the industry. Because I always think it's interesting how people first get started. So how did you, Alex, is there a moment in your childhood where you said, I'm going to work in the game industry and that's what I'm going to do?
So I suppose it's got two major parts to it. Like growing up, I always knew I wanted to work in games. I didn't know I wanted to work as an environment artist till I got to college. There's a guy I went to school with, a guy called Callum, and he always used to bug me because I used to tell complete like BS stories. Like at the time, Predator Concrete Jungle, not long come out on the PlayStation 2, and we're in school and we're talking, and I just start making up like, oh yeah, they're working on a sequel, and I just designed this game like talking out my ass, and he believed it. And like like the next week I'd be like, no, I was joking, I didn't true. And he was like, God damn it, I actually got excited for that. So I've always been passionate about games. I've always played games. When I got to college, so this is where like it diverges a little bit. I was playing, I was getting into professional sport. I was playing rugby, and there was like a point. There's two colleges in my city. One which was a much better college for learning game art. It was like more focused. The other, putting it politely, was a substandard teaching experience at college, but it had a very, very good rugby program. That was like my first sort of like, okay, I need to make a sort of a decision here. So I ended up going to the one more dedicated to the game art, and had a very bad experience. I did, even at university level and high level education, they struggle to have the funding to have good curriculums for game art. So you can imagine what it's like at a level down at colleges. Most of us we were pretty self-taught while we were there. All the students taught themselves, were competitive with each other. And that's how we learn. Like one guy would make like a water shader, and then I'd be like, hey, I modeled this gun, this is cool. And then like the next person would be like, yeah, but I've learned how to make fire VFX, and we'll one up each other constantly. So I left college. I stuck with rugby after having such a bad experience. I was kind of like, okay, I'll stick with rugby for a bit. And for a couple of years, sort of I did well. I got into, got good representative rugby. But I got to the stage, I kind of knew like rugby wasn't paying great. When you're in that like sort of not quite superstar level, but you're at a professional level, the pay is really poor. So I was working full time as a bricklayer, whilst playing, doing all the training for rugby and doing game art on the side, like trying to teach myself game art. And so push come to shove, I was like, okay, I'm spreading myself too thin. Rugby really isn't going anywhere. It's not a long term strategy. So I quit. I went back to semi professional. I started a serious game studio. Funny enough, I was freelancing for the serious game studio while I was at college, just doing some like 3D assets. So reached out, asked if I needed like an artist, and I joined. Which, although I didn't want to work in serious games, is actually quite rewarding. So for those who don't know, serious games is basically using game technology to create learning and education tools, or should I say, using game technology for non-entertainment purposes. So we'd be in the Unreal Engine making like there was this like it was a point and click adventure game for the home, and it's basically to help children with learning disabilities, like, and gamifying them learning what is and isn't dangerous in a home. And these sorts of things were kind of like, okay, I didn't envision doing this when I was at college, but it was very rewarding. Compared to what most game art is, making things that blow up and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
It was a very fulfilling process. Yeah, that was my first taste, and it was I kind of had to BS my way into it a little bit, because they're like, oh, so you're a 3D artist, that's cool. Like, do you know how to use Photoshop? Can you do like UI design? I was like, yeah, I know Photoshop. Barely opened it. I barely knew it. I had to like frantically research like UI design and like how to use Photoshop and Illustrator and After Effects leading up to me going into the studio. So yeah, that's my first taste of, that's my first foot in the door at game art.
Well, it seems like a lot of the people that we talk to have a similar story to where it's kind of like fake it till you make it, get your foot in the door, and then go from there. And like, I guess, Alex, like, why do you think that a lot of like you had this experience at college, with substandard like curriculum? Do you think that's just people outside of the industry don't really know how to build a curriculum? Is it people just not understanding like what a person needs to enter the industry?
I think I have my own thoughts anyway on the education system. I think it's quite archaic. When you look at what the modern day looks like in terms of work, and I'm not talking about the games industry, any industry, everything's fast moving. Everything is, you have to pivot and come up with new ideas, and technology is moving so quickly. The education system teaches you to absorb information and regurgitate it, and it's like makes everyone a cookie cutter of each other. And I just think that's an archaic way of teaching anyway.
Yeah.
The games industry is like it kind of like an exaggerated version of why it's a problem. I mean, look how fast the game industry moves. Technology changes year to year. Software changes year to year. And I mean, I've done a lot of university talks, and I had one recently where they actually asked me, they're like, hey, you mentioned PBR, for those who don't know, physical based rendering, which has been around since 2008, 2007. They're like, hey, you mentioned PBR. Do you think we should be teaching our students about PBR? And I kind of like, I thought he was joking. I was like, you are teaching them, right? That's literally been the workflow for the past like 15 years. No, we haven't really touched on it. And these were second years. And I was like, oh my God, this is appalling. However, some universities do it better than others. There's a lot of variability within the education system, but all the guys I know who come out of university and like land their first jobs, they're doing majority of stuff in their own time. Like what I don't see, and I've not seen to this day, is somebody who just does their core hours at university, does that through their education process, finishes, and then they walk into a job. Like, it just doesn't happen. Everyone who gets their first jobs, they have to put a lot of extra hours in, just because there's so much to learn. Like, it's a very saturated market. Like, I think the numbers are something close to like, if you have 150 students on the course, only 10 of them will land a job. Like, wow. That's how competitive it is. And that's not only from the good universities. That's not even taking into consideration some of the ones which aren't so tailored to game art. So with an industry, so that with all the things together, highly competitive, industry's moving a million miles an hour, education systems can't keep up. I think that's why we end up with this situation that we're in. But there's a lot, like, there's so much research compared to when I was getting into the industry. There's so much stuff available now. You have mentorships. YouTube, vast array of YouTube content, flip normals, our station learning, podcasts, all this stuff available to us, and Discord. Discord's been amazing for like learning communities. I know where a lot of my learning took place was on Discord, but Dynasty. It's the tools are all there where you can't like blame the education systems. There's a
Yeah.
lot of shoot. I see a lot of people coming to the discords and they get they're very upset and they're like, oh, screw my university, they're teaching me this and this and it's useless. And I'm like, yeah, maybe it is, but you've got all the tools available at your fingertips to teach what you need to know. Like rather than sit there and blame the universities, make a difference. Like teach yourself what you need to know. Who cares? Let them do them. You do you. And I get their frustration to some degree because they're paying vast amounts of money for it. Yeah, the education system for the games industry is kind of in a bad place right now, from the traditional point of view.
Yeah, and I think like my I have 3 kids and they love games and they like tinkering around with stuff, and they use things like Scratch.io. It's visual programming for them. Even things like playing in Minecraft and being able to down Unreal or Unity for free and all the tutorials in there. It just seems like there are so many paths that someone can take to start into the industry that it is weird to me that the education side of that, it just seems so disconnected from how games are being made. But yeah, and as someone that has been, helping people in ArtStation, like I think it's awesome that there are those mentorship problems, mentorship. What's the word I'm looking for? It just left me. You're able to mentor people online through, like you said, YouTube, Discord, and all these other ways, instead of just, hey, go to college and chances are you probably don't, you spend all this money and there's no way you're going to get a job because of this program. So that seems like it'd be pretty frustrating. So Alex, do you have a game from your past that really had like an impact on you, like a specific video game that's like, this is the one that I'll always go back to, or you hold it on a pedestal, even if it hasn't aged that well, right?
Um, I suppose there's 2 or 3. I've had games affect me in different ways. You know, growing up, like the most iconic game, which I've always had vivid memories of, and I think this is nostalgia, was on the PlayStation 1, Abe's Odyssey and Abe's Exodus. I remember on Abe's Odyssey, I was too young. I was born in 1994. I'll be watching my older siblings play Abe's Odyssey, and like I just remember as a kid, I hear all the funny noises and the characters, and it's quite a dark game as well.
Yeah.
And then when Exodus rolled around, like I was old enough to sort of kind of play myself, and around them guys. So that was a very nostalgic moment for me. But I think the game that really will always stick with me is the Metal Gear Solid franchise. Um, I Although Kojima is an absolute madman, and he can tell some of the craziest stories, I really like. I spend a lot of time reading a lot of philosophy and all this kind of stuff, and the subject matter which Kojima gets to is very deep. Although I also find it quite entertaining the way the community responds to it, because people kind of see the surface level stuff of like Metal Gear Solid 2, and they're like, "Oh, this is ridiculous and cartoonish and stupid, and Kojima's a hack." And I'm like, "Yeah, the surface level stuff is a bit weird. Like when you get into the sub narratives that he's telling, it really resonated with me." And I love the cinematic side of stuff. I although I play a lot of games which don't have cinema and story to them, I play like Escape to Tarkov or like stuff like this. It's them games are the ones which I want to make, the ones which stick with people, because that's what I've thought about recently. Like you have games which they're a fad almost. Are we going to be talking about Fortnite in 20 years? Are we going to be talking about PUBG in 20 years? No, I don't think so. I'll be talking about. I mean, Metal Gear Solid now is 20 years old. I'll talk about that game for another 20 years. Like it stuck with me, and stuff like Halo. We're going to be talking about that. They could have finished Halo at 3. We'd still be talking about it to this day. Like there's games which will resonate with people, and I think that's because of great storytelling along with great art. Games which are like these fad games, I'm not really that interested in. You want to and it sounds like a bit mushy, but you want a game to leave a legacy. You want it to have an impact on people. Most recently, Last of Us will have done that. God of War has done that. Horizon. These are the games which people remember for years to come, and they're not just going to pass to the sands of time.
And do you think because I've been thinking about that a lot also, because it seems like a lot of the industry likes to chase that trend that, hey, we need to have a BR mode. So at the expense of this game that we're making, we also need to tack on this BR mode just to kind of chase this. And I think because really it seems like that's like a AAA developer problem, because a lot of the indie devs, they're like, well, we can't do that. We can't support that many people. So let's just execute on our vision. We'll make these awesome little titles, and we'll just let those people go run and play around in that big money, because
Mm.
unfortunately it is big money, right? And that's why it's, instead of, it's making a product and not a game, in my eyes. It's
Hmm.
like, chase this. And you can kind of see that happened with the MOBA genre. Unfortunately, Blizzard just kind of let that thing get away and run with them, and now even they
Yeah.
had to play catch up years later. And now it's happening with auto chess. Auto chess got super popular as a mod also. Then everyone seemed to start jumping on, hey, we've got to make an auto chess. And then, BR happened somewhere in between there. And unfortunately, it just seems like just like, and the games that you mentioned, it's a vision that they had and a vision that they executed on, and Sony's been doing really well at that. Just because they're like, nope, this is what we're gonna do. I don't think Last of Us needs a BR mode, because I
Yeah.
don't even know how that would work in that universe. But yeah, hopefully it's something that people are just, we could chase the money, or we can make things like you said that have a legacy. Like, and I don't even know if Final Fantasy is a good example of this, because Final Fantasy VI is that game for me that'll always just, my perfect game, right? Despite,
Mm.
like, I know it's not perfect, but to me, when I played it, it was a perfect game for me. And just, to have that legacy, instead of, all right, we chased the fad and it failed, so shut down a studio and now move on to the next thing, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. I think also there is ways to tackle it. So, for example, I mean, this is where I had a bit of an egg on face moment. I remember when Fortnite announced the BR. I was a big fan of Fortnite before the BR. I loved the sort of world they built. I loved the art style, the gameplay. It just didn't take off. It just wasn't as popular as it could have been. And when he announced Fortnite, I was like, it will bomb. PUBG's too big. No one's gonna want to play this. This is not gonna work. And now, like, Fortnite is, the biggest thing since sliced bread. Um, I think the trick is games have to take an idea and innovate on it and make it a little bit different and have their own twist. Apex Legends did a great job with this. They managed to stay somewhat relevant. Like, I mean, although it's nowhere near as hot as it was when it first launched, it's still got a pretty solid fan base and user base. I think Call of Duty actually nailed this pretty well. They came out with, I mean, I played the Modern Warfare campaign. I loved it. It was a fantastic campaign. They put the effort in. Um, he had a really good multiplayer, and although I think the multiplayer may have fallen to the side a little bit, so they can focus on Warzone. And I have my own concern, issues with the size of that game now. I think it's over 200 gig, which is absolutely absurd. However, they were able to sort of like, okay, we have these three components, and we'll put the necessary time into each. Like you said, though, I think they were only able to do that because they're just so big, and it's Call of Duty, throw money at it. Because the campaign was great, the multiplayer was great, and Warzone's, it had a fresh twist on things. Um, but it is almost like they are constantly chasing. People are chasing. There's a lot of people chasing, and Death Stranding was a great testament to this. I didn't like Death Stranding. It's not my type of game, even though I'm a Kojima fanboy. It just wasn't my type of game. But they went, they had a vision, they did their thing, and I can respect that because we need gameplay diversity in the industry. Not every game needs to be a first-person shooter or like a battle royale or a looter shooter. Hey, we've got this game. No one's done it before. It's just this completely niche thing, and it's like Marmite. Some people loved it, some people hated it. I was like, okay, I was one of the people who hated it, but I'm glad it's here because it's like it's something different. It's a different type of game, and it caters to a different audience. And that's the only thing with the AAA scene over the past 10 years is that it's been very samey. Um, and that's why I'm glad that then you get things like Horizon Zero Dawn and God of War come along as well, where it's just like, okay, story. You think multiplayer is the only thing we can do, and story games are out? Like, guess what? they're just as big as anything else. I mean, God of War really hammered that point home. Like, it blew up big time. And again, I'm happy about that. I'm glad I want diversity in the games industry, because sometimes you're not in the mood to just shoot things. Sometimes you want to build things.
Right.
Sometimes you want to be told an excellent story. So, although I do think it's a concern, that whole chasing games and fads. I think there's enough people walking their own path and have their own visions to offset that. I think it's a natural evil with it. I say natural evil. It's a natural entity within the games industry.
So, Alex, as an environment artist, you get to play all these amazing games that we just talked about. You just like walk around these games and be like, "Hey, I could make that," or "Hey, we can do this," or "What would our take on this be?" Because honestly, like I don't know as much. I don't know what an environment artist does, other than in my mind it says you build the environment that you play in, right? Can you extrapolate on what you do on a day-to-day basis?
So to the first part of that with the gameplay stuff, I don't play that many games just because I'm busy. I have this isn't a good thing. This is a bad thing, and I'm trying to fix it. I struggle to switch off. I'm like, if I play games, I'm like, I could be working, I could be doing personal work, I could be doing whatever. So I don't play games a great deal. I have carved out like my friends have helped with this. Halo 3 came out on PC, and I was like, we're like, okay, every lunch we're gonna play one mission on Halo 3, and it's like that's what we're gonna do. And it was really good. Like it was really healthy for me just to be like, okay, I'm gonna just enjoy this. Like I'm not gonna worry about the micromanager of my time and what I'm spending my time on. I'm just gonna enjoy this game. And I'm currently doing that with Horizon Zero Dawn. That's come out on PC. I've just like carving out time to like dedicate to playing games. Um, but in terms of what my day to day is, it is I'm quite a generalist, I suppose is the best way to describe it. Like environment art is it's a very broad term. I mean, I've done over 60 episodes of my podcast, and every environment artist who comes on, their job is slightly different. It's as descriptive as someone saying I'm a 3D artist. Like there's so many sub levels to that it's almost non-descriptive. So my main areas is like world building, level art, building the compositions, building the spaces, and I also do material art. So all the surfaces need materials. I specialize in creating them. But I also dabble in other areas. I create the props and the assets sometimes. We use something called trim sheets to create like multiple assets out of one texture. We use something called trim sheets, which are a really common technique. I do little bits of lighting. Like, I'm quite general. I intentionally I do that on purpose because my first job at Serious Game Studio, we were working on a new project every single week. It was like we only offered a certain amount of time to each company we work with. So I was constantly on new things, and I really loved that. And the same with like working in iGaming with Inspired and Live 5. Your projects are only like 3 months long. So I was constantly on the next thing. So with my own career, I've always tried to stay quite general because if I was just doing like level art all day, every day for 2 years, I'd be bored brainless. Like I need to do different things to keep myself occupied. I like to be learning. I like to be dabbling in different areas. But you have people who focus on just making foliage, and you have people who focus on just lighting. People who just focus on making materials. Like it, you'll speak to anybody and they'll tell you a different story. And then also within the studios, the pipelines vary. So someone like I don't know, The Last of Us, the way or like any of the Naughty Dog, the big American studios, they make their materials all with ZBrush. They hand sculpt stuff. Another studio will do everything using simulations and using software like Houdini or Blender. And then another studio is like, okay, we only use designer, substance designer. So even within them categories of like of environment art, there's then different pipelines that different studios specialize in. So it's a very granular, like, I don't want to call it segmented, but yeah, it's very hard to say this is what environment artists do because it just varies so much.
Well, and it also sounds like maybe that's why the educational system just can't keep up with it because
Yeah,
it's like, well, what do you teach? Like if you go
exactly.
into construction, it's like this is how you build a house, this is the 2x4s you use. But if you go into game design, it's like, I don't know, take this calculator and make a game on this calculator.
Yeah, and then you also got like, think of it like this: an education, your typical higher education, 3 years. This is assuming that at the end of every 3 years, the university like updates their curriculum, which they don't. Like curriculums can be anywhere to like 8 years old. But in 3 years, a whole new pipeline has been introduced and gone. Like it's only a couple of years ago, substance design now really blew up. It was with like the Naughty Dog people when they launched their like first use of it, they really blew up. And already we're at a point where we're like, okay, substance design is not as dominant as it was like 2 years ago. You know, Zebra stuck around that whole time as a very viable option. You have mega scans, which are like photo scan assets. So the industry moves so fast that it's nearly impossible for traditional education systems to keep up. And also, them systems are built and taught by people who are most part not in industry or have not been in industry for a long time. Because everyone who knows these pipelines are in the industry working; they're not teaching. So that's the other side. There's people who retired like 15 years ago, and they can teach principles and they can try and keep up with it, but are they up to date on the software you need to know to get into the industry in 2020? Not really, not the ones I've spoken to. And I've done, before COVID hit, I did like 5 or 6 university talks, and for the most part, some of them were like, there's a ray of light, and that there's a positive messages being put out. For the most part, I was like, Jesus, you guys are behind, man. Like, you need to keep up.
How can you be teaching these people this? So as an artist, like, do you have a favorite thing that you enjoy making? Do you enjoy the foliage? Do you enjoy messing with the lighting? Like, what's your favorite thing? Like, I can sit down and crank this project out and it won't even feel like work.
So definitely not foliage. I explicitly do not do foliage. I avoid it at all costs. I hate it. It's difficult. Like, I lean away now from like making every single asset in an environment, because environments take so long to make. Like, that's an 8-month undertaking. There's two things I like doing. I like doing material art, which is all procedural and a lot of procedural tech, simply because it uses a different part of your brain. Like, you're almost feel like a programmer sometimes. And I can sort of wrap that project up in a weekend, and I'm not locked down to something. Like, I have the attention span of a goldfish. So I'm like, I'll be interested for like a day, and then by the end of that day, now it feels like a chore because I don't really want to work on it. I want to work on the next thing. So materials are one thing I like doing. So it's actually something. It's quite funny when I speak to people like, "Oh, you're a materials artist," because on my portfolio I have so many materials. So I'm like, "No, I'm an environment artist. I just have a lot of materials because that's what I do in my spare time a lot." The other thing I'm doing a lot at the moment is taking like Megascans libraries, which are all photo scans, make environments album, and do lighting studies. I'll tool up my lighting ability, creating compositions and art pieces. I find that very useful as well, because like I said, I don't want to make a whole environment. I don't want to have to texture every single asset and model every single asset and do high polys and low polys and all of these kind of things, because it just takes so much time. Like, each one of them can take like a couple of weeks, and then it's like, okay, I need to make 50 assets for this scene. Okay, say that's that's like 100 weeks straight away there,
Yeah.
and then like, oh, I gotta actually put the scene together, and then I've got to light it. It's just a lot to do. So I like quick turnarounds, where I can sort of explore an idea and be finished with that idea very, very quickly. So that's why I tend to stick to materials and lighting.
Yeah. And is that one of the reasons why the industry is using so many contractors now? Because there's a lot of contract studios that are specialized in these one specific thing. So it's just easier to give them that work, and so that studios can focus on, main core gameplay.
Um, it's quite a broad topic. So depending on the size of the studio, like, I mean, okay, let's take someone like Ubisoft, for example. They have like over 10 studios across the planet, across the world, and they're working on multiple projects. They could probably, they hire a lot of full-time people, simply because they can, like, they have the leeway to be able to go, okay, we're finished with this project, we're going to move you on to this next one, and it's always this next project to work on, so your skills are never wasted. On studios where they have like one key focus at a time, what it tends to be is they have like a core team of full-time staff, the guys working out the pipelines, working out how we're going to do things. They spend like pre-production working that out, and then once it hit production, it's like, right, now we need manpower. Like, we don't need somebody to reinvent the wheel for us. We just need the manpower to execute the plan that we've set in place. So that's when you reach out to contractors. You get on, you have two types of contractors. You have your outsourced studios, and then just contract artists. And contract artists are there for, like, say, 6 to 18 months, and you're just there to crank out the work, do the work. Right, the game's shipped now. We need to go back to that skeleton crew again to work out the next project. And then you finish your contracts, you move on to new things. And that's just the nature of the industry just at the moment, where most studios do not have 3 or 4 projects going at a time. They have one project, they wrap up the project, and then move on. studios are, one thing I would say though is studios are also cluing in a little bit and getting this worked out a little bit better. Where they're so as the first project's wrapping up, the next one's already in development. You slowly transition people across into it to keep so you don't have to like lose everybody, then bring everyone back on board. But you could go like studio to studio, and you'll get a completely different answer on how it's run. Because then you've also got a smaller studio will probably actually have full-time people because they'd expect their people to do multiple things. People like me, where it's like, okay, you're doing all the materials first. Okay, now you need to focus on level art. Okay, now you need to focus on lighting. I'm there for the whole process because it's just they don't have the resources to employ a specialized person per role. So you got that aspect too.
Yeah. And also, Alex, I kind of wanted to pick your brain on this whole quarantine situation because Counterplay Games, you guys have been working remotely from the beginning. Do you see
Mhm.
that as a strength? Does that help like company culture? Like, is that a stronger bond? Is it a weaker bond because you don't see everyone all the time and it's all digital communication? Like, how does that affect the culture of Counterplay Games?
So Counterplay were all remote before COVID, probably worth mentioning. And it's funny actually because when I joined, I was like, "Oh god, this is going to be a nightmare onboarding with a remote studio. This is going to be horrible." And it turned out like it's shocking. I've worked in multiple studios. It was the smoothest onboarding process. I started on the Monday and I was up and running by the start of the day Wednesday, which is unheard of. Like most onboardings, I'm out of action for the first week and a half.
Yeah.
Um, so that was surprising. As for culture, so I worked at Decagon before Counterplay, and I was also remote. And I hung out every day in Discord with my colleagues, and it helped the culture. It helped us get to know people, and feel like you're friends. Because I treat every colleague I work with as a friend. I just the way my mind's wired, like from the rugby days, you work harder for your friends. So starting a counterplay, I knew a lot of people there anyway. Had a lot of friends there, Enrico. I knew Tim. I knew Kurt. So there was that aspect to it. And also, there's a bit actually it's quite daunting for us because a lot of them artists as well are the guys I looked up to, like Enrico, and Anna, two of the strongest material artists in industry. People I looked up to for a long time. Tim was one of the first guys I spoke to when I was getting into the industry, like asking for advice, and now he's my art director. So that was kind of daunting. So I was kind of like keeping a low profile for a little bit. But it is weird. It is odd, the online thing. It is odd, but I mean, I've been like dragging people into Discord from the company, just like, hey, let's just talk in Discord, let's hang out, and it's been really really beneficial. Like you build a genuine relationship with the people. Um, but remote work, I really hope more studios clue into it. It opens the doors so much. Like you've got so much talent available to you, where before you have to worry about visas and remote relocating people. You can just go and head on the talent you want if you work remote, which has been really really good. Counterplay managed to assemble a really strong team, and then there's also this weird thing where like it kind of opens the door to work as well. I'm based in the UK. I live in Coventry. I'm not in a position to relocate. Well, in that case, there's only like 4 studios in my general vicinity, which was like available to me. None of which I particularly wanted to work at the time. So that's when I was out. That's why I was at Decagon, and then ArtStation and now Counterplay. Remote work just opens the door. It just means, oh, actually, I can work for these American companies or these Swedish companies or whoever it might be, and it's not an issue and it's a norm. Like the more studios accept this, the more talent is going to be available to them. So for me, it's a good thing. Like if not much can come from COVID, but hopefully this is one of the things for the games industry that will come from it, and it's here to stay. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Yeah, touch wood.
Yeah, and I can imagine the cost savings for having because a lot of the games industry they have studios in these big cities that the cost of living is super high, the cost of renting a studio space is super high. So being able to just spread out and not have that cost, I mean, it seems like that would be super beneficial to a lot of companies to just save money in order to actually hire other people to work on those games. So
Yeah, it is, and also to the artists. Like, there's some hard. Look, it's no secret that the games industry at the entry level does not pay great. So then you're like, okay, not great salaries. and then you're asking artists to like relocate to the city centers of these expensive cities, and suddenly now they're barely scraping by. If it's a case of okay, we open up remote work, fine, you have the same salary. Let's just say this, you have the same salary. Let's like not even talk about the studio's cost saving. You have the same salary, but you get to live on a cheaper part of the countries, in cheaper locations, out of the city center, and still do your job. It's like great. Like I can get by. I can get by on that. Then you've got, like you said, companies will save a lot of money, so potentially salaries get better. Because that's one of the biggest issues with the games industry right now is entry level salaries are abysmal for the amount of work that needs to go in to get there. It just doesn't reflect in that, and that's that's a challenge that the industry as a whole needs to tackle. But I think they are taking steps to tackle that.
Yeah, I hope so. Because usually it's like, hey, we're going to bank on you wanting to be in the industry more than getting paid so that you can get
Yeah.
your foot in, right? And it's taking advantage of that passion and that desire. So as someone that works from home, Alex, like this idea sounds super, like, I don't know if I'd be able to do it. I have enough distractions when I'm working anyway, between like looking at Twitter and checking all this stuff. Like, but all right, now I'm home with all the distractions here. Like, how do you manage that? This is the time where I'm in the office? This is the time where I'm out of the office? Or is it just like, hey, when I feel like I need to get down and start working on this, I will. If not, because as an artist, I
Um,
imagine it's a lot like that.
I'm probably an outlier in this because people have spoken to me in the past about it, and I'm like, shit, I need to like figure this out a little bit. So I'm a bit of a workaholic. I work for both ArtStation and Counterplay at the same time, so that's like two jobs. Plus, I do the podcast. Plus, I do with personal art. I'm pretty much like, okay, alarm goes off at like 6 in the morning. Go to the gym now. The gyms are back open, and then I'm back at my desk, and I'm at my desk until like probably 9 p.m., half 9 p.m. Now during them times, I'm quite strict, and I get away from my desk. So I've got like I walk the dogs at set times to force me to. I've got to get away from my desk and do something. I'll go for walks during the day. I'm one of them people. I'll be at my desk for that amount of time. I'm not necessarily working consistently for that amount of time. There'll be times where I'm talking to people on Discord or talking to people in Slack. Because you have different types of people. There's some artists I know, good friends actually, who are like they can't sit at their desk for 16 hours, but when they're at their desk for like that 8 hours, they're really efficient with their time. So you have different people who work in different ways. At first, it's a really hard adjustment period. I'm a social person. I love speaking to people. Yeah, as you all know, with the
Yeah.
podcast, I just want to speak to people. I love being around people. So that adjustment period of like, okay, I'm at home now all the time was very, very odd. But all I basically said was, okay, a lot of my friends are like an hour and a half away in another city. I'll just make a conscious effort. Like every other week, I'll just go stop at their place and see them. And I've just got to be very strict on myself to be like, I need to go see them and just get away from the computer and see my friends. I can't do that in the workplace anymore. So I'll just do it that way. But yeah, apart from that, it's basically I'm at my computer. I juggle a lot of things. I don't really carve out time like, okay, this set 7 hours for this and then this set 7 hours for that. It's like I just go, I have all these jobs to do today and they just need to be finished by the time I've done my day. So it might be like I do a couple of hours on ArtStation and then I tackle a task I need to do. And then I, jump back and jump into a meeting quickly, then go back. I'll back and forth between things and just manage my time. As long as I get through my tasks, and I mean, you can see, I'll show you on the camera. I've got a stack of notebooks, and each notebook is for like a different topic or different things. I just have to do lists everywhere, and I'm like, okay, here's the things I need to do today. I need to make sure they get done, and if they're not done, I'm like, okay, I need to work overtime and make sure they get done, because otherwise, when you're working two jobs, you're doing all the other stuff I'm doing, like it can get on top of you very quickly, and you can fall behind very easily. So I'm quite strict to myself in that sense.
Well, that's awesome. I can imagine. So on top of all that, you're like, hey, I need to start a podcast. So why start the podcast then? Like, what itch does that scratch for you?
It's very selfish. It's purely self. I mean, I'm really glad that people find a lot of value in it, and I have a lot of people like contact me saying how much it's helped them, and I'm thrilled for that. It's very nice to hear. But I started the podcast purely out of selfish means. I like talking about ideas, and I was reading a lot on like some some philosophy stuff, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Carl Jung, and like they were talking about like discussing ideas and like speaking his thought and all this kind of stuff. So I was like, okay, I have a load of ideas. They might be wrong. Speaking to other people might help correct me on things, and it did. Like everyone I've spoken to, they've shared their perspective on the world, on the game art industry, and it's helped me just round out my ideas. But it was purely selfish. I just wanted to speak to people. I was just like, I've got these people I look up to. My first guest was Ben Wilson, one of very close friend, and he's a girl I've looked up to for years. I was like, I want to speak to him. I just want to pick his brains on some things, and I may as well turn it into a podcast. Hey, maybe there's stuff I want to know, other people want to know, and it turned out to be so. It was funny because every now and then I get a bit of heat because it's not your traditional podcast. Like it's not like I ask questions and then it's like question answer. It's a discussion, and I'll discuss ideas I have, and it might be the person gives a 10-minute answer, and then I'll have like a 3-4 minute response, and it's like it's not. I ask a question, I just let the guest speak for say their 2 cents. It's like it's a discussion. We're having a conversation. It's not an interview, which some people have moaned to me about. Hey, you talk too much, and I'm like, cool. I did this for selfish reasons. It's my podcast. If you don't like it, don't listen. And it's like then I don't mean that in a combative way. It's just I get a lot more value out of a conversation than I do an interview. If I wanted to ask questions, I'll just type it to them and type the question, and they can get back to me. That's the way I see it.
No, and I think that's super interesting because you're right. Like most of the people that start podcasts, we do it for selfish reasons because it's, it's like, hey, we just want to talk to people and it's a good way to record it. But like you were saying, like, if you have ideas that are wrong, it's an opportunity for people to correct them. Like, I think unfortunately, like everyone is so scared to share their opinion for fear of being wrong and being ridiculed, right? That we all just kind of keep it in. So we don't share those. So like you said, like, hey, if you're willing to put yourself out there and say, hey, if I'm wrong, correct me, I think we could use a lot more of that. Because now, if you put a wrong opinion on Twitter, you just get attacked and, people hate you and they shun you and they say, hey, this person's garbage. And you lose that nuanced conversation. So it sounds like you're being able to have those conversations and actually like learn and grow from doing that. Yeah,
there's been a couple of times it's been very beneficial. Like recently I did one, I do like a side podcast, which is the insert topic, where there's a subject and I bring a group of people on, we discuss it. And one of them I did recently was women in games. It's a very sensitive subject. And it's funny because everyone got back to me after and like, dude, it sounded like you guys were walking on glass the whole time you were talking because it's like you're picking your words very carefully because you say one wrong word and you could potentially upset a lot of people. And I had I came in with like, here's an idea I have, i.e. the games industry has for the most part solved the issue of like women in the games industry and the diversity and all this sort of stuff. They're in the process of fixing it. And then I was not so much corrective as like, okay, this is an issue you're not thinking about. And it was more of a social issue, i.e. the way men and women work together, which is not unique to the games industry. It's across every workplace. And I was like, didn't think of that. And we discussed that and it's very productive. Or like the most recent one, I had Baj Singh on, who's an art director at Creative Assembly. And we talked about voluntary overtime, which is, we have crunch culture, which is, you need to work to get this project finished. Then you have voluntary overtime, which is, I want to put extra hours on this for whatever reason. And Baj went into explaining, why this is so very, very, not good. There's elements to it which is toxic. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, I'm one of them people. I will work voluntary overtime. I was like, okay, explain. Here's why I do it. Here's my points of view. Like, I think it's perfectly fine what I'm doing. Like, explain to me why is that wrong? And he went in and he explained it, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I didn't think of it like that. And you make a valid point, and it's like, okay, I need to think about this a lot more. And it has something that's been on my mind a lot more recently about how I portray myself in the community, because I'm a workaholic, and that is not a good thing. Like that's the sort of I say to people a lot, like, yeah, I work a lot, and people are like, oh god, I wish I could work as hard as you. And I'm like, no, you don't. Like, this isn't good. Like, this is bad for my like family relationships. This is bad for setting a standard. Like, it's not good. I had a message from somebody basically beating themselves up that they weren't doing what I was doing. Like in terms of the amount of work, I was doing a lot of personal work. I did the podcast, did 2 jobs. And that was a big wake up call for me because I'm like, shit, like people are looking to me and thinking these things. I'm like, I'm not setting a standard or a norm. Like I am who I am, and that I have the capacity to work like that. But that shouldn't be expected from anybody, and no one should expect that of themselves. We're all individuals at this point. But I was made aware of it. I was like, okay, shit, I need to start thinking about this a little bit more and how I put this message out there. So that was one of the big wake up calls, and that came again from the podcast. People just telling me about how they used to be. A lot of people who come on are experienced people, and they'll explain to me about like how they used to be like this, and this is what happened, and now they're not that way so much. And I'm like, I need to listen to this and hear this, and incorporate into my mindsets and help develop as a person, because people are, when you get messages of young artists or students saying, hey, how do I work like you, or like how do you do so much, I don't get it, like don't try and do this, like it isn't healthy, it isn't good. And that's been a big shift at the moment for me.
Yeah, and hopefully it's like you said, you have to be willing to listen to take the advice, right? And I think that's just something that a lot of people, like, we're so set in our ways and no one can tell us anything, that it's like, yeah, but that's you. That won't happen to me, right? So
Yeah,
being able to,
that's actually the exact message that happens. Oh, so bad. Oh,
but it's important to be able to take that advice and be able to, like, we don't listen enough, I don't think. Like in our social medias, like they're not social at all, right? Like Twitter, Facebook, it's not really social. It's, I'm going to spit out my opinion at you. You're going to listen. And if you're on my side, cool. If you're not on my side, then we have to fight to the death. And unfortunately, that's what our social medias are. So there's not a lot of nuanced conversation happening there. And I think that was one of the reasons we wanted to start talking to people on our podcast, is just, hey, tell us your story and we'll listen. And you know what? We can learn about different people that work in this industry. And that's really what it's about, because like we always say, humans make games. They're not made by algorithms. Well, I'm sure there's some game that's made by like some super AI or something, but people make games, and it's hard to make a game. It's not easy. If it was easy, more people would do it. And it's just interesting to hear people's stories, how they got started and why they do this, because we're passionate about games. We love playing games, and it's just something that we enjoy doing, and we enjoy talking to people that made that their career, because I think everyone deep down would love to make that their career, but not everyone does it because it's not something that's easy to do.
Oh, it's the key word where you just say career. Like, it's not a job, it's a career. And I've given a lot of talks over the past year about the fact that this is a career. A job is something you get paid to do because you don't want to do it, and you do your 9 to 5 and you finish. The games industry isn't like that. You have to put so much extra hours in your development, upfront just to get in. There's so much extra hours you put in, and then you've got to stay on top of that. Like we've spoken about, that the games industry moves so fast. People who want to stay in the industry, you roll with the times. You have to, and that means a lot of extra hours and a lot of extra commitment. And it's kind of like you have to be all in that this is a career, and that can shock people sometimes. A lot of studios I've spoken to, I'm like, hey, this is how fast the industry moves, and you're gonna have to stay on top of it if you want to stay in it, and you want to make this a long-term goal. And it's not for the thing, that's not for everybody. Not everyone wants that lifestyle, and if you don't, kudos to you. Like, who you are and you know what you need. But if you're going to be in this, be aware of just what you're getting yourself in for.
Right. Well, Alex, I really appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the chat, kind of like you opening up, letting us know like where you started, where you're going, because it's fun to talk about people that work in games, because there's so much variety, right? And that's anyone, and like we always say, anyone can make a game if you have the passion and you have the desire. You put the work in. There's tons of things online that you can go and you can learn how to make a game. I mean, YouTube is a thing that, hey, if you want to get educated by YouTube on how to make a game, I'm pretty sure you could probably do that right now. There's that much content out there, or by listening to podcasts. But Alex, I think we've taken a lot of your time. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. We really appreciate it. Can you tell people where they can find you on the social medias, in case they want to find you? And I guess I didn't even know you had a second podcast. I mean, do you have more than 2 podcasts? Are you doing multiple?
So the insert topic is a tag on to the GDD podcast. We have got something with our station in the mix, which we're working on at the moment. But yeah, in terms of the socials, like the two main ones, I'm really active on Twitter and ArtStation. So if you search Beddows Design into Twitter, you'll see me. And if you search Alex Beddows on ArtStation, I'm on there. Also, if you go on the learning tab, I've given multiple talks on like a lot of the soft skills, getting into the industry, being successful in the industry. So you can find me on there. And I release a lot of free content. I release all the work I do, all my materials. I put for free on my store, so to help people learn. So yeah, they're the two best. If you want to get in contact with me or just want to find me, they're the two best places to start.
Awesome. Alex, thank you so very much. And everyone listening to the podcast, we'll see you next time.